Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. I think I'm going to do a response to actually a group of YouTube channels. What are Kevin, Paul, and Brian doing right? I'm listening to a new book. It's called The Defining Decade, and I have to check. I think her name is Meg J, and she's a PhD, and she's a researcher, and what she's kind of come across is that your 20s are really important because they set up your 30s and your 40s and so forth. And I know there are non-traditional students, and I certainly have non-traditional students, but I think what she's saying is that there's a certain time in your life where you don't have the constraints like I do, where I'm place-bound with triplets, and you can figure things out a little bit easier. And what she goes through are talking to a number of her clients and figuring out what it is that people are really struggling with. So the reason I titled the episode, the Kevin, Paul, and Brian show is because on YouTube you can kind of follow them, and there are three pharmacists who are struggling with, okay, well, here's pharmacy, and then here's what I get satisfaction from, and sometimes they gel and sometimes they don't. We'll start with Kevin. So I know he's working, has invested tens of thousands of dollars in his own personal growth, and he's very open and very transparent. And I was really impressed that he's been able to make a transition that's really hard, and also that he is working really hard to figure out what it is that it's going to be that really makes him satisfied with his day, with his career, with his life. He had a recent episode I'll talk about a little bit later. Then Paul Tran, he has 3 or 4 jobs. I think he has 4. But the first thing that he's doing right is he doesn't have a single source of income. So even if his primary job went down, he would still have other opportunities and wouldn't be scrambling, fearful, and so forth. He's paid off his loans and been very mindful about doing those types of things. But he also has, I don't want to call it a side hustle because I know it hasn't really reached the monetary fruition yet, or I don't think it has. But he's gotten tools from one company, and I think he's working with Home Depot to do some things, and he's also working with video, and both of them are clearly developing skills that are very useful in the digital marketplace. And then Brian Fung is just taking a different direction. He's the informatics guy, and he is working on an MPH at Hopkins, and then that's going back to Baltimore and getting that experience. But also I know he's traveling soon and has a tremendous travel schedule. So these 3 guys are really, I don't necessarily know if they're all in their 20s still, but even if you're late 20s, early 30s, the way that pharmacy kind of pushes you way late to start your life, I feel like this book doesn't really adjust for that change. Like, well, what if I was in grad school or professional school for the first 6, 7, 8 years? Do my 20s really start? Where do my 20s really start? But there are a couple of things that she talked about that these guys have dealt with and are kind of going through right now. One of the big ones was in terms of, is it better to be unemployed or is it better to be employed? And the answer is weird. It's better, you're going to feel more depression or depressive symptoms if you are underemployed than if you are unemployed. Now, being unemployed causes more problems later on, so that's not the goal. But what I'm telling you is that this recent kind of rash of underemployment that we're starting to see in certain areas of the country, that's really going to have a tremendous impact on a lot of students. And then add the student loans. And what she's saying is that the 20s or this early graduation time is a really uncertain time. And there are specific things that you can do to make them less uncertain. And there's certain directions that you want to try to go to see if that's the direction that you should go or that it's not. So for me, I went out to see if writing and journalism was my thing, and I really didn't understand how that would work. And then the Kindle and audiobooks, they weren't really accessible to me as just a person who says, well, I just want to publish my writing. So I may have gone too soon with that. But then I went home and then I started a real estate practice, or I started as a real estate agent. And there again, I was taking a chance and saying, wow, I feel it's more work, it's more hours, but I was much happier with that freedom that I had. So I left retail or full-time retail practice around 7 or 8 years after I graduated. And we just had a terrible storm. My rental took a beating in the basement. Find out I didn't have flood coverage, so now I know what flood coverage is. And then our roof also took a beating too. And why I say this is that the roofer came over and he said he had 50 jobs to do. And what he was saying was literally he had 50 individual jobs that he could do. And I said, oh, well, you must get people all the time. He's like, no, I can't keep people on staff. I know that you got your pharmacy degree. I know the expectation was to get a job in a pharmacy or to work with a pharmacy or to work as a clinical pharmacist. But I feel that narrows things so much that it completely closes the door to what might really make you happy. And in that book, Meg J gives a couple of examples of people who did just that. Well, my parents' expectations, my expectations were this. But when I went with what I was working to develop skills in, what I found myself doing, so while I was daydreaming about this, I ended up, kind of leaving this other path. And what I'm trying to get at is that I think that it's a good audio or book resource to start answering the question, what should I do with my life after graduation? Because many of you are just graduating, and it takes about 2 or 3 months. But about 2 or 3 months, the newness wears off, and all of a sudden, you realize that you're going to be doing the same thing for a very long time. And that realization is a bit disheartening, because here you are, you've been learning something new every year for the last, subtract 6 from when I graduated. So 19 years, I learned something new every year. And now I'm going to learn a little bit new in the first 2 or 3 months, but then my job is kind of the same every day, every week, every month, every year, every decade. And to this generation, I know that is simply not acceptable. So I know residency gives you 1 more year, up to 2 more years of that kind of newness, but I feel like answering that question, figuring out what you want to do, because it's probably not, it may not be on your radar at all. At no time did I ever say, later in life, I'm going to be an audiobook editor, and my favorite thing to do is going to be creating great scripts and great audiobooks to teach students. That never, when I barely passed English. And I barely passed English not because I didn't know English, I actually knew English pretty well. It's that I just hated conforming to that style, that kind of prose, formal writing, and that just wasn't for me. And other people don't want to hear that either as an audiobook. So my specialty is making it conversational for nonfiction. So I guess I was just really excited to have this book, have this resource to kind of start thinking forward about some of the things that, in my 20s, what did I do? And I made some right moves and some wrong moves. But here are 3 guys on YouTube that you can watch that are telling you, this is what I did, and this is why I feel like this, and then now I feel better about it. And it's just a phenomenal trio of opportunity for those YouTube videos. So let's go through some of the things coming up. So again, on Facebook, I have my 24 US codes and 25 UK free audiobook codes. So it really is probably just going to take a matter of putting your name down there in the comments, and then I'll ask for your email to send you the specific instructions. And this week I'm going to the Pharmacy Technician Educators Conference. It's in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I hope I'll be able to interview a lot of people there and talk to them. Those are my favorite things to do, although I certainly enjoy doing an interview as I'm doing it. Really, when I get to an event, there's kind of an excitement, and it's nice that while you're in one room, you're always like, well, I wish I could have gone to that one too, or I wish I could have met this person. I wish I could have known about this person. So hopefully I get to do some interviews there with some of the pharmacy technician leaders and educators that are at the conference. So that should be fun. Pharmacy Podcast Network. I know that PGX for Pharmacists, Ken Sternfeld, had a talk about the antidote for delayed clinical trials, episode 626. And then I'll spell his last name, Kevin, Hejnas. He did a couple of YouTube videos. One has 220,000 views, and it was about a 20,000 calorie day, or the 20,000 calorie challenge, which is nuts. But if you think about a lion eating a deer, that's about 25,000 calories, which makes it a lot easier. Just kind of do it in one thing. But as you see him sitting there in that first video, and he's got 24 donuts and a couple of wraps, and I think he has a gallon or half-gallon tub of Blue Bunny ice cream. It is just, well, it's if you got nothing going on, I would check it out. It's pretty cool, and it's a great interview by Haley Ward from the Pharmacy Future Leaders. Really talking about how you can be known for something, but it doesn't have to be something bad. It can be something very good. And I know that in general, and I'll talk about Paul Tran's video this week, in general, pharmacists are very conservative, don't want to make mistakes, don't want to look bad. But on the other hand, you are not known for anything. And if you're not known for anything, I think you're kind of sunk in the water here. People are looking for specialists. People are looking for somebody that can fix things, that can fix very specific problems. I need somebody that can fix a roof. I need someone that can do drywall. I need somebody that can put in tile. I will probably go to 3 different companies: a roof company, a tile company, and a drywall person. And I know that right now you're thinking, well, that would close me off to opportunities. But that's not what people look for. People are looking for a very specific thing. And when they look for me, they look for pharmacology for people that didn't have chemistry but still have to pass pharmacology. And hopefully, I continue to do well at fixing that or helping with that pain point. TLDR Pharmacy. So I know he had a busy June. He has a new post, How to Understand and Destroy Your Student Loans, talking about the Your Financial Pharmacist course that they have there. And if you are on TLDR Pharmacy's email list, there is a special offer in your inbox. I know that he sends certain things out to his email list first as just kind of a thank you for being part of his community. So check out the email box if you haven't for an email from TLDR Pharmacy if you're subscribed. Otherwise, do check out his blog, tldrpharmacy.com, How to Understand and Destroy Your Student Loans. And he talks about how much he saved when he really had a good understanding of his student loans. And this is a smart guy. This is a guy that's just about to pass the board certification for chemotherapy. So when we talk about student loans, and I was on Your Financial Pharmacist podcast too, we have intelligence. I almost maxed out the English GRE score with a 98, and then I put a math of 87, so 98th and 87th percentile. But just because I can do English and math doesn't mean I know a darn thing about student loans or the very specifics of them. And so I would definitely recommend the YFP team's course, or just start listening to their podcast and kind of get an idea of who these guys are and what they're doing. Speaking of, we can talk a little bit about that with the Pharmacy Advisory Group. Hillary Blackburn just had Tim Church from Your Financial Pharmacist podcast on, and they talk about the VA and talk about his role as part of the YFP team. So I always recommend hers as well. When I looked at Your Financial Pharmacist website, it's always a little bit of a delay between the newest podcast episode, which I think they were talking with Tim Baker about why it matters how your financial planner gets paid. And the key is that in some way you want people that are working for you to be tied into your success. And if somebody just gets 1% or 2% off the top of what they sell you, that's not really doing anything with your success. But if in some way they're tied to your success and your income and the money that they're building for you, then that's a completely different model. So I would definitely check out the YFP podcast, the last one that they had on. And then MedEd 101, so we'll split the blog and the podcast. So the blog itself, you can check out. He's got a number of free different, this is Eric Christensen at MedEd 101. You want to check out the BCPS stuff, or you want to check out some of the free pharmacology things that he has there. He does a really good job of going from like P3, P4 year, and then residency year, and then on from that, where I focus more on P1, P2 year. And then now, to some extent, trying to get a resource out for APPE students that we can talk about cases, we can, work up certain ways to keep things in their mind, keep things memorized, so that when preceptors start throwing things at them, they're not like, okay, well, what drug is that, or what class of drug is that? They're moving on to the advanced things. So memorization gets a bad rap in the classroom right now, but I have to tell you that before understanding comes memorization. That is the very first and most fundamental pillar. So real-life pharmacology. So Eric Christensen also had an episode come out this week on amoxicillin and augmentin pharmacology. It's a little bit longer than his usual ones. It's about 15 minutes. But again, very listenable, very easy. Us Midwesterners, well, now I'm a Midwesterner, just kind of have an easy way of talking about things and just make it feel like it's going to be a good commute. Easy, quick 15-minute update on amoxicillin and augmentin pharmacology. Okay, so on to the YouTubers. So Kevin Yee, he's done a couple of recent videos about pharmacy. First, he did why he quit pharmacy, then why it's not a good career, and then things that people don't really tell you about pharmacy. And he's not trying to be mean or difficult with the profession. What he's just saying is that these are the reasons I did pharmacy, and these are reasons that you probably shouldn't do it. And what I'm seeing over and over again is that dissatisfaction comes from not being tied to a purpose that's in line with a purpose that matters to you. I should shorten that in some way or another. But because my family, I'm first generation college, I struggled so much with just the system and understanding how things work in the United States and how things work as a new student. And the mistakes that I made, 90% of them were preventable. I didn't know that I didn't study well at home and never did my homework at home because it's just not a good environment for me. But if I was at the library, I would absolutely be able to do it. I didn't know that the sticker price on a private school wasn't what most people paid. I eliminated all private schools when I applied for school because I didn't know. And my parents said, this is what we can afford. And I said, okay, well, then that takes out all the privates. I didn't know that I possibly could have paid less for a private school, gone to a smaller school, and it would have been a better thing because I wanted to continue with wrestling and I wasn't able to because I went to one of the big schools. And Florida didn't have wrestling. Maryland was one of the tops in the country, and I could have been a decent D3 wrestler, I think, but that was at the privates, and the privates were double what my parents were saying I could afford. So that was just that was just pure ignorance. I just didn't know the answer. So separating intelligence and wisdom, I was an intelligent person. I did well, but I wasn't a wise person. I didn't know. I didn't have an older brother or older sister to tell me, oh yeah, when you're applying for schools this, or when you're studying that. So I really appreciate Kevin being so transparent with everything. Paul Tran, he did a new video on things you should not do during pharmacy rotations, and it is always fun to see how conservative some students are with these types of things, but then how some students completely break the mold and like, do I really need to tell you to put your cell phone away? Do I really need to tell you not to do this? And so it's kind of it's a good reminder of those things that you can do to maintain your professionalism and keep in good stead, because you really never know who the pharmacy resident or the preceptor knows. Funny story from an old movie. It's called Doc Hollywood. It was Michael J. Fox. And Michael J. Fox was going across the country to do work in this private practice in Beverly Hills. He was going to be a plastic surgeon, and I think the drive was from New York to LA. And he runs into, like, there was a cow in the road. He turned right and ran into a fence and knocked down the fence. And then, his car's wrecked, and come to find out that the fence that he wrecked was a judge's fence. So he gets sentenced to community service. He's now delayed for this big interview out on the West Coast with this plastic surgeon. And then he stays in town for a while, and he saves the town doctor, and the doctor is very semi-retired. Like, he's got a note that basically says, "Call me only if something's disattached or something really bad happened." And come to find out that after he, loses the interview and possibly the position, that the doctor knew the surgeon, recommended him, and he got the job because of it. So circling all the way back to this whole preceptor thing, you really never know who these preceptors know. Obviously, you hear over and over that pharmacy is a small world. But, I have, 5,000 connections on LinkedIn. I don't know what it is. But I know a lot of people that can help these people, and I want to help them. And it's always easier if you make it easier for us to refer you. And so that's why I do work and ask them to get on LinkedIn, and I do ask them to do certain things that will hopefully maybe push their boundaries a little bit and make sure that they're starting to get known for something, because people are looking for specialists, especially if in a little more saturated areas. So Brian Fung, no video this week, but I feel like he is going to be traveling. I put in a request from a video from Iceland just because I think it's cool. I think that traveling is really important. Getting away is really important. I always go kicking and screaming because I do love to work. And, once I'm about 2 or 3 days in, that's when I feel not relaxed, but I feel like I'm starting to, like, all the racing thoughts are going away. I'm able to kind of start putting things together, starting to get something out of the vacation in such a way that I can bring them back and come back with more energy. So to kind of recap, I do recommend this book called The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now by Meg J. And I'm not sure when it was written, because some of the percentages and the numbers she talks about seem like they're a bit older. So I'm wondering if I'm going to have to look it up, because I feel like this can't be a recent book. The material is certainly current and is certainly up to date, but let me see when the actual original publication date was. No, it was 2013, so it's maybe the economy hadn't lit up like it is now, but she'll talk about some things about unemployment rates and things like that are probably not quite as true. It's not as hard to get a job. But it's certainly true about underemployment. It's certainly true about getting caught up in internships that are unpaid, jobs that are less than satisfying. And she provides some really good solutions. So it's one of the top 1,000 books on Amazon. And to give you kind of perspective on that, my Memorizing Pharmacology book, I think, is number 20. Let me see. I want to say it's like around 20,000 or something like that, the paper book itself. 34,000. So my book is around 34,000, and my book sells, I don't know, about 4,000 copies a year. So as you move towards number one, you're exponentially moving up. So you're really looking at something that is selling probably, I'd say it probably sells 100,000 copies a year, easy. And I definitely recommend this book, because I feel like the one thing you want right now is you've been in curricular, institutionalized, whatever you want to call it, for so long that now that you're given all the options, it actually is not the best thing. And so we like those. It was so much easier when I graduated. Would you like to do retail or hospital? Like the My Cousin Vinny, would you like the breakfast, lunch, or dinner? You just pick one or the other. And now I feel like we're still kind of going to one or the other, where it goes, Do you want to do residency or not do residency? Okay, well, if you do residency, then which residency do you want to do? You don't have to decide. You do PGY1. And then, you have this choice of probably like 30 specialties or something like that if you do PGY2. So anyway, I think that it's really, really valuable to take time to start listening to other people that are struggling with it, the 3 YouTubers, but also, and succeeding, the 3 YouTubers, but also somebody who is a PhD and can answer some of those questions, because your 20s are going to be apparently the most uncertain time in your life. And I can vouch for that. Right now, it's the first time I've been able to invest in real estate and go, I know where I'm probably going to be in 20 years. And that's awesome in one way, because I can, make accurate investments because I know where I'm going to be, or I hope I know where I'm going to be. All right. Well, that was a long one. So I will talk to you guys next week.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.